maybe my second full day, because I had a partial day on Tuesday, and I actually feel like I've been here longer than that, in a good way, like in a really great way, and I hope you're feeling that way as well, and I just really grateful for everybody on the staff and everybody here at the ashram that welcomed me and hopefully is welcoming you as well. So a little bit about this, just to kind of recap, because some of you weren't here last night. In my evolution of this idea of yoga for healthy aging with my partner in crime at the time, Nina Zolotov, we saw that a lot of the interest that was coming to us from the community, not just the ideas that we were grappling with this idea of yoga for healthy aging, fell into three categories. The first category, or the first pillar of yoga for healthy aging, is that known as compressing morbidity. In other words, reducing the amount of time that you're in poor health, or the converse, which I like to think about, is increasing our health span so that we're actually spending more of our time in good health over time. The second pillar, which we got into a little bit last night, and we actually talked about this with one another, is the idea of maintaining independence. And I don't know if you have a family member. My mom is 89 this year. She just turned 89 a couple of weeks ago. And she lives in assisted care, but she lived in her own home during the pandemic, by herself in a two-story home that had a full basement that she would climb the stairs on. And she had had a couple of hip fractures over, and this is really relevant to what we're going to talk about in a little while. She had had hip fracture on the one side about 8 years ago, and then about 5 years ago the other side. And she never really regained her full capacity to walk unassisted. She started using a walker, and she got pretty good at getting around with that. But my brother went to visit her, again, sometime during the pandemic, and he reminded me that her stairs from the first floor to second floor are polished wood. And she was wearing these kind of slipper shoes, and she'd leave her one walker at the bottom of the stairs, and then she'd walk up the stairs in these slipper shoes to the top to get her second walker. And my brother was freaking out. He was thinking she is going to fall back down those stairs and break her neck, and all the terrible things that one would think. So we felt like it was really time for her safety to be somewhere that was just generally safer for her. But she really didn't want to leave. She wanted that house represented her independence, even though she actually wasn't driving on her own anymore. She always had, friends or Uber drivers taking her around town. And she was really, she had a community of people that were already sort of caring and supporting for her there in Toledo, Ohio, where she lived, while I'm out in Oakland, and my other brothers are in other cities around the country. But we just felt like it was that time. But boy, did she want to hang on to that idea that she could live in that house safely for as long as possible. And this is one of the big discussions that happens in so many families. Anybody else had this discussion in the last 5 or 10 years? Yeah, there's at least, a dozen of us. And if you haven't, get ready, because it's probably coming at some point. It's a big moment of transition that happens for a lot of adults as we get older. So one of the big things that people are really thinking about, I think, in my community and communities that I've interacted with, is how can I maintain my independence for as long as possible in a safe way for me, right? And maybe also what I love about the Eastern traditions, I know the Buddhist tradition has a practice of anticipating one's death and actively working with that. In fact, tomorrow we're going to have a death cafe where I suspect maybe some of those kinds of ideas might be brought up and discussed. But I think it would be really a wonderful practice, if you don't already do this periodically, is to think about how you want to make a transition from your independence to a period where you may not be fully independent any longer. That said, there are many things that we can do with our yoga practice to maintain good independence as we age. And then finally, the realization that the inevitable things and changes are going to come our way at some point. We're going to lose people that we love along the way. We're going to lose some of our capacities at some point. It's inevitable. I don't know any adult that I've seen make the transition from life to death who didn't face some of those things through their journey. And so the ability to cultivate equanimity especially through some of our yoga practices, is a wonderful skill to have as something that we can use as one of the foundational pillars of yoga for healthy aging. I also mentioned that in regards to staying independent, there are what I call the 4 key physical skills that we can maintain or improve upon with our yoga practices. And those include maintaining or improving our strength, maintaining or improving our flexibility and mobility, maintaining and improving our balance. And then I think about agility as kind of balance 2.0, right? Where we take the stable, static balance we had maybe a moment ago when we were balancing on one foot, and we take that into dynamic movement in life. There's a neighborhood very close to me where I teach yoga in 2 different studios almost like 3 blocks away. Kind of not really good market planning for the studios. But anyway, I teach at these 2 places, but there's a couple of retirement high-rises in the neighborhood. And around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's really strange, a lot of people with canes and walkers are out traversing the boulevard. And I always think it's so interesting just to kind of observe people kind of going about their daily tasks. And one of the things I see is the impact of maybe unawareness on posture over time and the development of the kyphotic curve that we probably see in a lot of people that we maybe even have in our own lives. And the inability at times, especially using a cane or a walker, to literally look up and see what the sky is like because of the changes that have occurred to the spine over time. So one of the great gifts of our yoga practice also, combining strength and flexibility and balance, is the improvement and the maintenance of really good posture as we age. And so this is another great gift I think we can take into each decade with us if we continue to do our practice on a regular basis. This is a photograph that my wife did a series of photographs of older adults. Her name is Melina Meza, and if you go to Melina Meza Photography, you can see some of her work. She's really, I've watched her photography blossom over the last decade since we first met and got to know each other. And she decided she wanted to do a series after working with me on Yoga for Healthy Aging of older adults and elders in our community who were examples of people that were kind of seeming to get some of the factors right in their life. And this is one person who contributed her beautiful posture, her variation of half moon pose to Melina's work. So we got to the point last night where I was starting to talk a little bit about the pillars and some of the tools, but I didn't really unpack it completely. So I wanted just to take a minute to kind of complete what we started last night. And so this will be great for both people who are new to me today and those of you that were here yesterday. So Yoga for Healthy Aging is really a toolbox which provides tools for fostering longer health span and compressing morbidity, supporting good independence over time, and cultivating equanimity for the inevitable changes we're all going to face. It also includes kind of a basic yogic philosophy for using these tools, which we touched on a little bit yesterday, and we'll just come back to that in a few minutes. So if that's what Yoga for Healthy Aging is, then what's in that darn toolbox, right? Well, we have physical practices, physical health tools for body, including practices that really support both the heart and brain health. In fact, there's a chapter on each of those topics in my book in which I kind of go into great detail about that. We're not going to go into that so much today, and tomorrow we'll touch a little bit on that when we talk about changes in cognition with aging that can affect a lot of folks. There are stress management tools which utilize the tools in toolbox number 1. It's like one of those cool toolboxes that have all those things that pop out. There's the main center that has your basic tools that you use a lot. And then there are stress management tools that kind of build upon that as well. And then there's also equanimity tools. So we'll talk about those just very briefly. So when it comes to the physical practices, we've got great asanas that can really support the overall health of our body over time. We have strength practices and poses that maintain muscle strength and bone strength. And I also would say that they can help improve the integrity and the structure of the fascia in the body as well. So you get really kind of a 3-for-1 when we think about the strength practices in our yoga practice. We also have practices that might feel more like they influence the flexibility and mobility of the body. And I will say that a lot of the yoga poses that I do in my practice, and I suspect from practicing here in your system, actually do both things at the same time. It's kind of cool, right? It's not like you have to necessarily be thinking about all the time, am I doing enough around flexibility or enough about strength? If you have a well-rounded practice, hello, kitty. If you have a well-rounded practice, then you get some of both of that, right? But we do have great practices for maintaining flexibility for both the muscles and the fascia, and preserving range of motion in our joints. In addition, as we know from our practices this week that you might have been doing already, we have great practices for maintaining the ability to balance, and hopefully this will lead to preventing falls. About 6 years ago, I got so obsessed with balance, and I was I'm not going to say I was bored, but I felt limited by some of the balancing poses in yoga. I had several basic ones that came up again and again, and I enjoyed them when I did them, but I started thinking about variability. And there's a lot of research that's been done about the importance of varying what you do. So you're not always doing the same thing the same way all the time. And so I decided that every week I was going to try and create a new yoga balancing pose. That was sometimes a variation of something that I already did, but sometimes it was an expression of things I was seeing in nature and things like that. So I have a YouTube channel that's called Baxter Bell Yoga, and if you go back in time, if you just subscribe to it, you can go look at the whole library. It's all free, and you can get for about a year. Every week I posted a video with a new yoga balance practice. So check those out, and probably tomorrow we'll do a couple of those, and maybe even tonight we'll do one or two of those. In addition, as I mentioned, in my mind, when I think about balance, I sometimes think about stable balance, when I'm not actually moving through time and space. But in reality, a lot of times, unless we're sitting in a classroom or we're behind our desk at the computer or we're driving in the car, life is about agile movements in time and through time and space. And so I really like to think about how do we bring agility into our practice. Now, we have the sun salutes, which is a kind of agility that kind of moves forward and back. Some of you might know about the Kripalu development of the moon salute that took place a couple decades ago when some of the women that were there were struggling with the certain aspects of the sun salute, and they wanted to do something different, and the teacher there said, why don't you come up with a new salute that would work for you? So how many people have done the moon salute? Or what you think is the moon salute, at least a couple. So it's a really kind of interesting movement that has a lot of lateral movement and squatting actions and side bending that is a beautiful balance, I think, to the sun salute. So kind of a modern permutation of that. So I like to think about how can I bring agility into my practice and vary that as well. And so I think that the yoga practice has some basic good tools there already, and you can bring a little bit of creativity into that as well to expand your toolkit. I'm also very interested in cardiovascular health because the number one reason why people die around the world is primarily from heart disease, right? I think it's over 60% or more of deaths worldwide are due to cardiovascular disease. The work of Dean Ornish, strongly influenced by the yoga tradition, creating a four-pronged approach to heart disease, was able to show over time, basically repeating the same study 4 different times using advanced technology each time. Not only was he able to, the third time he did his study, show that he could reverse the blockages in the blood vessels in the heart that were blocked from cholesterol deposits through his four-pronged approach. But in his 4th permutation of the study, he was able to show that he could turn on 500 beneficial genes through epigenetics that I mentioned yesterday a little bit, and turn off 500 detrimental genes that had an influence on heart disease. So we have a lot of really sound scientific evidence that, and his program includes a vegan diet, a daily 1-hour gentle yoga practice, a regular walking program where you walk at a mild to moderate pace for 20 to 30 minutes a day. We did that this morning on our silent meditation, so check that off your box for today. And also a group gathering where people could just talk about their individual challenges with heart disease in a non-judgmental atmosphere. And that was the 4-prong approach, right? Really kind of simple. It's so simple and elegant at the same time, right? And so applicable. And of course, a lot of the people in the medical field were poo-pooing this idea, saying, as they often do, oh, patients will never do that. There won't be compliance with this program. And what he found is that after the completion of his studies, the people that were in the study actually got together with the other people in the study and continued to do the practices together on an ongoing basis without any prompting from the researchers. That wasn't part of the research plan. They were just so powerfully impacted by this. Many of them had angina, heart pain with simple exertion, and usually within 2 weeks of starting the program, their angina disappeared. So suddenly, they were moving through the world without the reminder that their heart was struggling to stay healthy. So anyway, really powerful things that we can do with yoga to promote really good cardiovascular health. So if we think about those as kind of some of our basic tools in the toolbox, and then we go into our specialty toolbox, we have what I call the stress management tools. And we know, again, from copious amounts of research that by reducing stress, or really improving the management of the stresses we all experience on a regular basis, we can prevent the major age-related diseases that we see around the world, including things like diabetes and heart disease and strokes, and many cancers now actually fall into this basket as well. So reducing stress helps to often prevent things like depression and anxiety. It can address insomnia. It can address people that are morbidly obese. And I always like to make a differentiation at this point in my presentation that I love Ayurveda because it talks about our different constitutional makeups. So that a healthy Kapha individual, predominantly Kapha, can have big bones and a large body and be completely healthy. And someone who's a healthy Pitta can have an average-sized body, as it's defined in the West, and have a healthy existence. And someone who's more of a Vata constitution can maybe be more willowy and slender and also be healthy in that constitution. And so when I talk about obesity, I'm really talking about unhealthy weight gain in any of those scenarios. Right? So we want to keep that in mind. And we know that reducing stress can actually be helpful in all of those cases. Stress reduction also boosts things like your immune system, which I think is so cool. We get additional benefits. So within our toolbox for stress management are the meditation practices and the pranayama practices, often that influence the parasympathetic and the sympathetic balance in our body, the autonomic nervous system, as we call it. I thought it was so great that Ariel was here teaching us about the vagal nerve the last couple of days. How many people got to experience some of her work? So if you didn't, it was really powerful. And you know what was so great about it is she did both some gentle yoga work, and then she brought in some more modern techniques for accessing the superficial nerve endings of the vagus nerve in the face, in the ears, and other places that are very easy to touch and access that can actually like say or speak to the vagus nerve that everything is safe, everything is calm, and now we can actually shift into the rest and digest response of the nervous system. So I think these newer revelations through investigation and research are really applicable and blend very nicely with our more traditional yoga practices. Restorative yoga, which may have more modern roots, is another great way to kind of work with stress management. Supported inversions have their own unique magic in terms of how they affect the baroreceptors in the aortic arch of the heart and in the neck. And they can kind of, again, shift us from sometimes our healthy stress response during the day. Ariel made the distinction between the idea of everything kind of triggering a fight or flight response. That's actually not what stress response is. We have a healthy stress response that gets us up in the morning. It gets us at our desk in front of our computer or working out in the world. And so that's a healthy version of the stress response. However, if we add chronic unaddressed stress to that, like life stresses, then that creates an accelerated or an exaggerated stress response. Supported inversions are an elegant way to trick your nervous system and your physiology into shifting back towards the rest and digest response. Very cool stuff. Very simple in a way, but very effective for many people. In addition, the power of Shavasana, right? The power of Shavasana, the thing that hooked me that first yoga class that I did in 1993. I still remember it to this day. And guided relaxations like Yoga Nidra, the program that Mark Halpern and Deerhart have been presenting this week, is also a really fabulous tool to influence the autonomic nervous system and the stress response. And I do want to mention from Ariel's course that we can impact the vagus nerve and improve the vagal tone through some very easily accessible practices. Breath work was the number one thing that she mentioned. She mentioned the gentle movements, and then the havening are some of these gentle stroking actions with the hands against each other, the facial areas, the ears, and things like that. And I felt really lucky to take her class yesterday and experience some of that stuff myself, and could actually feel some of the benefits almost immediately. And then finally, our third toolbox includes everything I've already talked about. But when we talk about equanimity tools, we have certain physical postures and stress management practices that help us remain grounded, staving off anxiety and depression, and also the encouragement from the yoga philosophy tradition to cultivate contentment, right? Even possibly happiness that naturally arises when we make peace with what we can't change and what we can change, right? That old adage. So our equanimity tools include the stress management practices, poses that many of us have found support well-being. So I don't know about anybody else, but I have a handful of poses. I call them the big three, and they include the following. They include legs up the wall, Viparita Karani. They include a supported child's pose, usually with a bolster. And they include Queen's Pose, or supported Baddha Konasana, with a bolster. And I find that if I can tap into those poses and do a mini practice with those, I can actually sense the shift in not only my stress response, but also in my sense of groundedness and calm inside. In addition, certain breath practices are going to be more appropriate when you need to be calming yourself, but there are times when you might be in the state of mild depression, or you might be in a state where there's too much kapha and things are too slow in your life. So some breath practices are stimulating, as we do in the practices here, which I love so much, with Kapalabhati and Bhastrika type style breathing practices, and others can be much more calming, where we extend the exhalations and we allow for a pause and things like that. And then the guided meditations, where we pick certain focuses in our mind to practice, and then other qualities of mindfulness practices and diving into yoga philosophy. So in Yoga for Healthy Aging, I like to keep it kind of on a very simple, basic level, because oftentimes I'm presenting this to people that haven't done very much yoga. They certainly probably have not investigated yoga philosophy. And so one of the things I talk about is abhyasa, or establishing and maintaining a regular practice. There's a couple of really great studies out recently that actually looked at the dosage of yoga that was being done and the results or the outcomes in those practices, and they found two interesting things. And that is that people that had been practicing for a very long time often had better responses, especially when it came to things like cognitive health over time. So if you were a long-time practitioner, that was a really cool thing. And then in addition to that, or separate, because you might be only a practitioner for 4 or 5 years, if you practiced regularly, if you practiced several times a week, the benefits that they were studying in those studies were much more evident than in people that only, say, practiced once a week or twice a month. So the dosage of yoga, whether it was weekly or over time, was very powerful in the outcomes that people would see in terms of this particular way of thinking about it. And then also this unusual Eastern idea that is not at all grounded in Western thought. The idea of cultivating the letting go of all thoughts of success or failure and simply focusing on the practice itself. Now, we could go further and say that we actually devote the fruits of our practice to something other than ourselves, to our selfish desires. And so this is a translation by Juan Mascaro that says, "Set thy heart upon thy work, but never on its reward. Work not for the reward, but never cease to do thy work. Do thy work in the peace of yoga and free from selfish desires. Be not moved in success or failure. Yoga is evenness of mind, a peace that is ever the same." So, I love to draw out these little kernels, these little pieces of the Bhagavad Gita that are so kind of clear and really digestible for someone that might be meeting some of this for the first time. So let's see if I can move that on out. Move it on out. Come on, technology, you can do it. One more time. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to just take 1 second. And do this. And I would ask you to mindfully stand once again, because I've been talking for about 20 minutes. And that's about as long as most people can take information in without doing what I call the Pomodoro break. Does anybody know about the studies with the Pomodoro tomato timer that we see in the kitchen a lot? Anybody know about this? So they were doing a study on attention spans and concentration. It's a group of psychologists. And they gave a group of workers a Pomodoro timer, and they had it at their desk. And they said, set this for 25 to 30 minutes. And when the timer goes off, no matter what you're doing or how much you're in the flow and the groove of your project at your desk, stand up and take 1 minute to move your body. You can walk to the restroom, you can go get a drink of water, or you could do some simple movement practice. So let's pretend it's our 1 minute break. Let's inhale our arms up towards the sky, and exhale, take a little crescent moon to one side, and then inhale, come back to center. Exhale, take a little crescent moon to the other side. And then inhale to center, and exhale your arms forward and down. Bring your hands on your hips, and as you inhale and gently lift both heels an inch or two off the floor, and then exhale, lower your heels down. Inhale, lift your heels up for a moment. Try to keep balance on the ball of the foot even. Exhale, come down. And now, as you inhale the heels up, take the arms up carefully, and then exhale, lower the heels down, and bring the arms down. Do that one more time. Inhaling, lift the heels. Exhale, lower the heels. Beautiful. And then shift your weight into one leg and shake out the other leg. And then do that with the other side. So give the legs a little shake out. All right. So let's mindfully come back to sitting for a moment. So last evening I shared a poem or reading from one of Yung Pueblo's new books. He's a kind of a newer author on the scene. He's kind of a hot thing around the country right now. He's a longtime meditator, and his story is compelling. So definitely read about him online if you don't know about him. But this is another excerpt that I really love from one of his recent books. So you might close your eyes for a second. I'll just read this to you. Do what is right for you. Do it over and over again. Lean into the light. Keep going even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Do not let doubt stop you. Trust the process when your mood is low. Let growth be your mission. Let healing be your reward. Let freedom be your goal. So if your eyes are closed, please open your eyes again. So every day I try to read one page of this particular book because there's a reading on each page and of the book. And it's been a really great little thing to do after my meditation. I usually read one of his writings. So today I wanted to shift gears after giving you a little kind of additional information about what yoga for healthy aging includes, and talk a little bit about yoga as it relates to balance and longevity. So I'm going to briefly talk about balance for a few moments. I'm going to revisit the idea of longevity and factors that contribute to longevity, both the positive and negative. And so when we think about this, I also want you to keep in mind that I'm really talking about health span when I talk about longevity, because I have no idea how long I'm going to live. I don't know how long you're going to live. And so we can be aware of how healthy we are in each month and each year of our life. Talk a little bit about how advancing age is associated with the increased risk of falling, and talk a little bit about some past studies that have been done that connect both balance and strength to longevity, and talk about a newer study that came out just a couple years ago on improving balance and longevity, and then a very interesting New York Times article that came out about the same time that talked about the importance of maintaining the ability to squat, and maybe throw in a few ideas on how that might inform our practice. So defining longevity in simplest terms is a long life, or individually, it's how long you're going to live, right? And again, I may not know that until the moment just before I check out. So it's an interesting concept to think about. Longevity is a combination of both our health span and our overall lifespan, and it's influenced by a number of factors that we'll look at in a second. Lifespans around the world vary quite a bit. Right? In the United States, 78.8 years is the average lifespan, and it's actually a little bit longer for women by about 5 years than for men. In Switzerland, 69, which is really interesting to me. I'm wondering if it's the mountain climbing. I just don't know what is behind that particular number. But in Japan, it's actually 81 years. And I think I mentioned that last night, that there's really a different mindset around aging in different countries. In Japan, they actually have an annual national holiday that celebrates the oldest members of their community. And those people are actually brought into parades and like given great feasts. And in certain parts of Japan, I'm sure many of you know this by now if you've dropped into the idea of the blue zones, but the families actually fight over who gets to have the elder in their home, as opposed to who has to take on the responsibility of caring for the elder. A completely opposite way of thinking about the value of the elderly in the community. And then also just acknowledging that there's been a rapid increase in life expectancy in the 20th century, which was due to mostly to changes in diet and nutrition, medicine, and public health. And that health span that we talked about last night is the number of years you live free of poor health or serious illness in your lifetime. So what are some of the factors that are associated with improved longevity? So I'm going to talk in a minute a little bit about balance and how that fits into this idea. But before we get there, there are some important factors to know about. Some beneficial factors include what sex you have. So if you're a female, you tend to live 5 years longer than males in most parts of the world. Genetics have about up to a 20% influence on longevity, but as I talked about yesterday, everything around your genes, all your lifestyle choices, can influence the turning on and off of genes. Your lifestyle choices, therefore, are really hugely impactful. And also the socioeconomic status that you happen to live in and the community characteristics that you have in. For instance, communities where there are heavy industries in neighborhoods where people actually live actually have lower longevity than neighborhoods that don't have those kinds of industries close by where they live. Those people that have good, healthy, close relationships tend to live longer. And also there are certain personality traits that have been identified that also can lend towards longevity as well. What are some of the negative lifestyle factors that impact longevity? Well, if you're a smoker, if you drink alcohol in excess of, well, now the most recent study that looked at every study that's been done now actually states that there's no amount of alcohol that's good for health, for your health overall, although some people obviously find that it's helpful as a short-term stress management tool. So I don't like to be a buzzkill for everybody who likes to have a glass of wine occasionally, but the recent research says that really there's no amount of alcohol that is actually healthy for the body. So all that idea of red wine being a heart health factor is actually been shown to not be true in the recent studies. Eating a nutritionally poor diet, leading a sedentary lifestyle, or being physically inactive. And the good news about this list is that we can actually reverse all of these things. And yoga can be very powerful. I've known a lot of people that have made big changes when it comes to smoking and drinking and other negative lifestyle habits that they had through their yoga practice. And I'm sure many of you do as well. So with that in mind, let's talk for a minute about balance. Balance is actually complex, and it's multifaceted. Our ability to balance is really pretty amazing when you actually look at it, and it involves multiple systems of the body that work together to keep us upright, whether we're going to be still or whether we're going to be moving. So we have visual inputs through the eyes, although there are amazing stories of people that were born blind that are actually quite agile and very well balanced as they move through the world. They use things like echolocation, using sound to know what's around them. I've even seen some amazing videos of a blind guy who actually rides one of those BMX bicycles through an obstacle course, and he uses echolocation, and he does that. And you would not know that he could not see what was around him. So even without visual input, we have backup systems or redundancy and balance that allow us to take advantage of staying upright. We have our proprioceptors that are throughout our body, and we have our exteroreceptors that are on the exterior of our body that are sending information into the brain. We have vestibular input from the inner ear canals, and we have postural reflexes that develop from the time we're infants until we're toddlers that kind of tell us when we're upright and where the horizon line is, and they have a conversation with the brain that kind of quickly resets if we get off balance in that way. All of these things are interacting with specialized areas in the brain. So this is a chart, and there's a lot of information. This would be a good one to take a picture of and look at later if you like to do that sort of thing. But we have sensory input from the body in all those areas I just described that goes into the brain. It goes either into the base of the brain in the cerebellum, or it goes into the higher centers of the brain, and that information gets evaluated in the background of our awareness most of the time. And then there's an output into our motor systems that kind of sends information back to the eyes, primarily, one of the main areas that helps with vision, but also to the proprioceptors that help us to right the ship if we're starting to lose our balance. Now, this looks like a one-way street, but actually there should be a big arrow going right around to the other side. So continuously, moment by moment, when we're up and balancing or moving, this conversation is going on between the body and the brain. And it's really quite elegant, but sometimes it goes awry. Now, what about aging as it relates to balance over time? Well, aging is associated with an increased risk of falling as we get older. Past research has demonstrated pretty clearly that as we age, our chances of falling increases over time. The statistics are kind of sobering, right? For example, adults over age 65 can expect a 25% chance each year of having a significant fall, right? So that's a pretty large number. When we get to 85, if we're blessed to have that longevity in our experience, the chance of falling on an annual basis jumps to 50%. Right? Now, 1 out of 5 of those falls will cause serious injury, or such as a broken bone or a head injury. And what do you all think is probably the most common thing that you've heard about in your family or in your community, a serious fall resulting in the breaking of what? The hips, right? And interestingly, that's not the most common broken bone from falls. The most common broken bone is the wrist from breaking a fall, right? The second most common area is the spine, getting compression fractures over time, often from repetitive kind of strong action in the spine, but sometimes not. And then finally, the hips come in at third place. But the hip fracture is the one that has the most negative long-term impacts on people's health. So some studies that I kind of love to refer to really quickly that I think are so cool. There was a 2012 study done in Brazil by a group of German researchers kind of collaborating. And what they did is they developed a very reproducible test that they could have an observer observe one of the participants in the study getting up from the ground and then getting down, and they had a rating system that was reproducible, meaning I could rate someone and you could come in and learn the system and you could rate them, and in all likelihood would give the same rating for that individual that we observed doing the transition up and down from the ground. And they evaluated something over 2,000 people, so it was a fairly large study, and they took some other data, and then they followed that group of people for about 10 years. So the study actually started like in 2002, and they wrapped it up around 2012. And what they found was the people that had the poorest scores were much less likely to be alive from any cause of mortality after 10 years than the people that had the best scores in transitioning. So if you think about that, one of the reasons that I always like to ask people to be mindful about how you're transitioning up and down is because you're then actually consciously practicing transitioning. And I have a bunch of ways that I teach transitioning. Now, a lot of us are sitting cross-legged or in chairs, right? So to get out of a chair, we usually bring our feet back, almost unconsciously. We tilt forward, get the weight in the feet, and then we come up. When we go down, we have to kind of reach with our buttocks to find the chair so we don't miss the front edge of the chair, right? That's the danger moment. When we're on the ground, if we come up from sitting and we're cross-legged, we have to actually have enough integrity and strength in our ankles, which we worked on today, to actually get up from a cross-legged position and uncross our legs without losing our balance. That's actually pretty skillful, right? There are other ways that might be easier. So I want you to think about that, and one more time, mindfully, transition to coming up, imagining that I'm rating everybody very quickly around the room on my scale. So come up as smoothly as you can with as little extra help, with other things around you or on your own body parts. Notice how that felt to come up, how steady or vulnerable you felt, and then the same quality of awareness as you come back down to sit again. So make that transition very thoughtfully. So again, one of the beneficial side effects of a regular ongoing practice for most of my students is that they get better in transitioning, right? And it seems kind of mundane and everyday, but all you have to do is look around at some of your friends and family members who are aging in an unhealthy way, and you'll see that one of the big things they struggle with is getting out of a chair, or getting out of bed, or sitting down in the toilet and getting up easily, or getting in and out of a bathtub or a shower safely, right? So these things become super important as we get older if we want that quality of life, that health span, and that wellness that I'm hoping that we can have as we go through this process of aging. There was a 2014 study that looked at another 2,000 people, and they evaluated some other things. They did do a chair, getting out of a chair, walking forward for 10 steps, and then returning to the chair and sitting down. It's kind of a common assessment of agility and balance, as well as how long they could stand on one foot. They would actually time them and see how long they could stand. And then also grip strength. They used a little device that could test their overall muscular strength. And they noted that, again, people that had good scores in those things typically lived longer, and they had lower rates of dying from all the causes of death that we normally see as people get older. And then more recently, 2019, there was a study on the impact of overall physical fitness on longevity, test by evaluating a brisk walking pace. And again, they found similar results. People that could walk briskly, safely, lived longer. They were less likely to die over the course of the study length. In 2000, I don't know if you were around when this came out, two years ago, there was a study that came out, or actually 3 years now in June, that was a new study that was published that looked at the impact of good balance on longevity, and actually it looked at it in reverse. And what they did is they asked people, that they devised this balance evaluation that no one had come up with. We had that other group that did the standing and sitting test, which was kind of cool and easily reproducible. But this group said they gave people 3 chances over the course of 1 minute to stand on one foot for 10 seconds, right? And if you failed to do that, you were at double the risk of dying from any cause. And I highlighted this phrase, all-cause mortality. This is a really good phrase to know when you look at scientific studies and they're talking about the impact of a new drug or a new technique, right? See if they actually evaluated all-cause mortality. This means anything that could have caused someone to die in the course of the study, right? And what they found is that your risk of dying doubled if you could not stand on one foot for at least 10 seconds. So the great thing about yoga is not only do we typically stand on one foot for at least 10 seconds, but we usually do it on both sides, right? So we actually develop that skill of good balance on both sides of the body, right? So we get double the benefit from our practices. So what did the study people do? Well, they developed an easy way to assess balance. They noted in their discussion that falls are the second leading cause of unintentional death worldwide. And up to the point of this study, no one had developed a simple way to evaluate that. And think about all the physicians that specialize in elder care. They didn't have an easy way, at least not that had been tested scientifically, to evaluate the balance of their aging patients to see where they fell in the risk profile of, does this person need some help or not? And so they developed this easy test, which I've described already, and then they applied it to this large group of people. This is what I call the flamingo, where we actually stand on one leg with the leg up, like a bird sometimes has their leg tucked under. So there's a lot of things that we do in yoga that are similar to what they do, but they set a time on that. They tested 1,700 people between the ages of 50 and 75, and 68% of them were men, which is kind of unusual in some studies these days, especially, well, now this wasn't a yoga study. If this was a yoga study, it would have been in reverse, right? There would have been 68% women in the study. And they followed them for 10 years. And on initial testing, 20% of people failed. That's 1 in 5. So that was a lot of people in that age group. And again, their risk of having died over that 10-year period was twice as high as the other group. So the thing I love about yoga is we have a lot of variety, and we can actually add to that, as I did over my 1-year experiment in coming up with new ways of balancing. What does that mean for us? Well, first of all, yoga provides us with an easy way to assess at least one aspect of balance, the 10-second test that was developed in the study. If you can do that, make sure you can do it with both feet. And if you can do that, keep doing what you're doing to preserve that ability over time. If you can't do it right now, don't worry, start doing activities like yoga that can challenge your balance and improve balance, right? So this is an opportunity to take action. And some people I know come to the ashram and they have not done a lot of yoga before. And I hope that this kind of information inspires you to say, oh, you know what? This would be worthwhile for me to actually practice regularly. And our practice earlier today, those of you that came with me, we did play around with our balance in a lot of different ways. And I like to make it actually interactive and more fun because we're more likely to do things that we actually enjoy. How does yoga support better balance? Well, first off, yoga has many balancing poses that we can do, so there is already some variety, and I think there can be more, obviously. Secondly, yoga asana practice supports the building of strength and the maintaining and improving of flexibility, which also add to our ability to balance well over time. Yoga has benefits for brain health and the nervous system, which are integral to that little system that I showed, that feedback loop that I talked about earlier. And other parts of the yoga practice, meditation, breath work, concentration, all of these things can directly and indirectly impact our balance overall. So, where to start and how to proceed? Well, if you're new to yoga, I would actually start by focusing on strength building practices. Of the 4 physical skills, and I think I mentioned this last night, if you had to choose, if you didn't know where to start with strength building. If you're doing a well-balanced yoga practice, you're going to get some flexibility along with that anyway, but make sure that you're actually doing things where you can tell that you are actually utilizing the strength building practices of yoga. And then if you're going to add something in next, add the flexibility practices. And when you're doing poses, even with both feet on the ground, notice when you can sense that your balance is being challenged. Even things like triangle pose can be challenging for people the first time they meet it, right? So asymmetric movement of our legs and feet in places that are not familiar to us can challenge our balance. So those can be balancing poses. They don't all have to be just on one foot or doing things that are super challenging. And then add in balances poses at a wall with props to make it safer so you can enjoy the practice, and then master and then advance. So, I got to a point doing tree pose where I could literally call and talk to my mom for 15 minutes in tree pose. I wasn't really paying that much attention, so my brain and my body had figured out how to do that. But all I had to do was add the cypress pose variation. If you've been to California, on the coastline, the cypress trees are bent by the wind. And so all I had to do was add in that little bend, and suddenly my proprioceptors and my exteroceptors were going crazy, right? And I once again had to almost relearn tree pose, which was awesome, right? I was advancing my understanding of how to be balanced in a good way. So I'm going to stop there because I've gone a little bit over time. My apologies. We might come back to the squat tomorrow. Last evening, I did not leave time for Q&A, and I, again, have gone over a little bit. So what I'm going to suggest is that if you have questions tomorrow evening at the beginning of my session, I'll do a little short Q&A about anything I've talked about so far. And also, please grab me like students did after class today if you have questions about what I talked about today or yesterday, and I'm happy to talk with you about that. So I want to wrap that up right now. I want to thank you for listening to some of my thoughts on yoga for healthy aging, and I hope there's at least 1 or 2 little seeds of curiosity that have been stimulated around this topic tonight, and I look forward to sharing more information with you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Namaste. All right, thank you so much. So I think there's usually some finishing announcements, so I'll turn that over to you, and thank you so much.
We'd like to thank very much Baxter Bell. Let's give him a big hand. And tomorrow he will continue his program and will offer a noon workshop here on the garden platform and another evening talk in the evening satsang. And tomorrow we have another workshop at 2 p.m. So Baxter Bell will be from 12 to 1:30. And then from 2 to 3:30, we have a workshop with Andrea Dearhart on Death Cafe. So we will explain a little bit about that. So we invite you to join Dr. Andrea Dearhart for a Death Cafe, a welcoming space to openly explore life, death, and everything in between. There's no agenda, no judgment, just heartfelt conversation. Whether you're curious, grieving, or simply seeking a deeper understanding of mortality, this is a place to share, listen, and reflect. And Dr. Andrea Dearhart is a devoted educator, advocate, and end-of-life practitioner dedicated to serving the dying and their loved ones. And she's also the founder of the Heart Way, a nonprofit organization, and offers compassionate care, education, and community support, guiding individuals through aging, grief, and death with dignity and deep presence. She also has a doctorate in cultural mythology and depth psychology, and she integrates ancient wisdom, ritual, and psychology to transform end-of-life care. And she's the author of several books, including Yoga Nidra, Graceful Transitions. So today, the Yoga Nidra course had their graduation with Dr. Mark Halpern and Dr. Andrea Dearhart. Tomorrow, there'll be this workshop with Dr. Dearhart at 2 p.m. And the following day, she will start a 2-day course on the topic of transitions, and Dr. Halpern will start a 2-day course on Ayurveda, which is called Healing Your Life. And now we'll go over the schedule for tomorrow. Oh, and we also have the books of Baxter Bell in the boutique, so we still have some copies, and you're welcome to check them out. Now we'll go over the schedule.